Kia ora tātou. Ko Andrew Doubleday taku ingoa. Our Gospel reading this morning for Sunday the 17th of October is from Mark chapter 10 verses 35 to 45. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came forward to Jesus and asked him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." And he said to them, "What is it you want me to do for you?" And they said to him, "Grant us to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left in your glory." But Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with?" They replied, "We are able." Then Jesus said to them, "The cup that I drink you will drink, and the baptism with which I am baptized you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared." When the 10 heard this, they became to be very angry with James and John. So Jesus called them and said to them, "You know that among the Gentiles, those whom they recognize as their rulers lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them. But it is not so among you. But whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many." This story follows immediately upon another episode where Jesus explains that suffering and death await him in Jerusalem, right on behind it. And it seems that once again the disciples have totally failed to hear or have simply ignored that which is unpalatable. And we're back again to the same issue. Now, we've touched on this a number of times over the past couple of weeks. This desire to be somebody and the sense of entitlement that so often can accompany it, and a desire to avoid the unpleasant, because it seems to me that this is one of the drivers here. Clearly James and John have heard and learnt very little, and I'm not sure that we can really blame them. The way things are the ways that they've always been. They really haven't had another model, and so their attitudes, are deeply ingrained in them. Kingdom values are so contrary to the way that things have always been, the way in which power is exercised. We saw that last week. How difficult it is, says Jesus, for the rich to enter the kingdom of heaven. "What?" said his disciples. "Who then can be saved?" In their mind, the rich were at the front of the queue. Of course, it was obvious, it was logical. They're the ones that God had blessed. They must be the ones who had automatic entry. And Jesus says no. He says the first, they shall be last, and the last, they shall be first. Jesus turns the accepted values of the day on their head. And here again, he says, remember, we've just read it a moment ago, "You know that among the Gentiles, those whom they recognize as their rulers lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them. But it is not so among you. But whoever wishes to be great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all." This is contrary to everything they know, everything they've seen, everything, well, maybe not quite everything that they've experienced. My wondering is if they've even noticed that Jesus is modelling something different. I came across a really quite interesting little story a couple of years ago. I was reading a book on leadership and leadership development, and the author, I cannot remember who it was, tells a story. He was a consultant to companies, and he was working on this first day with a company. He had a reasonable staff, and working with the very senior leadership. And the first exercise they did was on values clarification. The senior leadership team were all there, from the chief executive down, and they were working on what their first value was. And they came up with this value which I thought was really interesting. And it was this: we all sweep floors. And what it meant was that there wasn't anybody from the chief executive at the very top to the janitor at the bottom that wasn't prepared to muck in and do what needed to be done to get the job done. That your pride, that your sense of station and entitlement didn't excuse you from being the person who ran the photocopier. Didn't excuse you from being the one who actually literally had to vacuum clean the floor if it was required, or do the dishes in order for the team to work and to get the job done. Interestingly, the author commented that at the end of the day, it was either the chief financial officer or the chief operating officer, who'd only been with the company for a matter of weeks, resigned. Because he recognised this was not the sort of company that he wanted to be part of. He did not want to have to sweep floors. He wanted to be the boss. Now, it was good for him to move on, so he wasn't undermining the values of the company. Apparently he became quite successful doing what he thought he needed to do. But that value, we all sweep floors, it struck me that it's something here of the kingdom values of Jesus. And as I've read quite a lot of articles, one of the things that comes through again and again and again is that we've had for some decades now a current move to the Jesus model of servant leadership. A recognition that a company, that a business, that society works best where people are empowered, where the people who are the leaders see it as their job to make sure that those people who are working for them and around them are given all the resources they need. They're given the encouragement. They've given the freedom to get on and operate out of their strengths. There's a servant leadership model where the leader sees it as their job to underpin the work of those people who are, in theory, below them. The only model that the disciples had, and the ones that they'd seen, was that of a dictatorial chief executive where the boss has absolute power. And notice that they found, once they found out, the other 10 found out about James and John's approach to Jesus, they were all outraged. Now, my hunch, it's not because they understood that Jesus was inviting them to something completely different. It's more likely that it's because they all secretly harboured the same ambitions as the two brothers and wished that they'd got him first. We imagine that kingdom values are so difficult, the world out there automatically rejects them. But in the story that I just shared about us all sweeping floors, what we're actually starting to recognise, that there's a real sense that for the last 2,000 years, the followers of Jesus have been salt and light. The followers of Jesus are like yeast in the dough. They have affected wider society. It may be that we find the church so often dragging the chain on so many issues where the world, that so much of the church readily rails against as being sources of persecution, actually has a better understanding of Jesus' kingdom values than those claiming to be followers of the way of Jesus. Well, it was part of the church that pushed for the abolition, which pushed for the abolition of slavery. It was another part of the church that were among its strongest advocates as an institution that needed to be preserved, as if it was part of God's appointed order. While part of the church is in the vanguard of seeking climate justice and seeking to mitigate the effects of climate change, it's another part of the church that are drivers of climate change denial. While part of the church is leading the way in seeking equal treatment and justice for people who are not heteronormative, it is another part of the church that is in the vanguard of preserving the institutions of society as they have always been, to the exclusion of all expressions, all other expressions of humanness. While part of the church is modelling responsible concern for the lives of those who are most vulnerable among us during a worldwide pandemic, there are other parts given to perpetuating conspiracy theories in order to protect their so-called precious freedoms, while exposing so many of their own people and wider society at large to the possibility of tragedy. The church is both at the front, in the vanguard for life-giving change, and also at the back, seeking to drag the church and wider society back into a meaner, less open and joyless understanding of what it means to be human in society together today. It seems that nothing much has changed since the times of Jesus, although, as I've said, there are real signs of hope. There will always be those who are open to Jesus' life-giving, liberating kingdom values, and those who are terrified that such changes will unleash God's wrath upon the world. In Jesus' time, the issue of the Sabbath was central to those among whom Jesus lived. While Jesus sought people's freedom, the religious leaders were terrified that if his subversive ways caught on, Israel would once again find itself facing the judgment of God and perhaps be dragged again away into captivity. In the end, it comes down to what kind of God it is that you believe you worship. Interestingly, both groups will appeal to the Bible, and both will find justification for their stance. In the end, I want to invite us to use a simple litmus. And while taking in all the information that's available and considering all the relevant factors with whatever the issue is, following this litmus through to its conclusion. The litmus is what I have in myself concluded is Jesus' mission statement. Now, you may not agree with me, but it's what I'm with now. And we find it in John chapter 10, verse 10. He says, "The thief only comes to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that you might have life and have it in all its fullness." Jesus came that we might all experience life and experience it in all its fullness. Now, if we took that as the lens through which we saw all these issues, we might come to a different conclusion. You know, I never imagined when I started this message that this is where it was going to end up, but there we have it. And you probably will hear me say similar things repeatedly in the future. God bless you.